The days of, getting big because you're a really good comic and you like build a following that way, like from people coming out to see you and whatever, that's like those days are done. Like if you want to build a big following and be a successful professional, um, by and large, the way to do it is to like build a big online following, because
Hmm.
club owners will look at your Instagram and want to know how many followers you have, how many people you can bring in. Like that is secondary to your raw ability. And I've heard so many, established professional successful comics like say this very thing. Like you're
Yeah.
not going to build a career just by being funny.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of the Johnny Rogers Show. I'm very excited for my guest today. He's a lawyer by day and stand-up comedian by night. Please welcome my friend, yours, Hart Shouldice. Everyone, welcome to the show. This is Hart Shouldice. Hart, you came up in conversation a couple days ago. I won't say his name on the podcast, but I'll tell you who it was afterwards. And I immediately wanted to tell him the story of, we mentioned this before too, but like I gotta get the story just right out for people because I've told a few people, but it just makes me laugh every single time. Hart had reached out to me and was like, "Oh, that's so cool that you were able to get Serge like a job at the restaurant because he was reached out publicly and was like looking for a job." And I was like, "I like help people out," so I was like, "Yeah, sure, come work here." It's not a glamorous job, but you know what I mean. Like, job's a job, especially if you need something. And he gets that, and then I just responded to you. I was like, because you were like, "Oh, that's so cool, like working in a restaurant, whatever," right? So I'm thinking like you're alluding to some interest, and I was like, "Yeah, if you need a job, let me know." You're like, "Cool, man. Yeah, sure." And then I see this show at Yuck Yucks, and it's like the whole thing is like lawyers doing comedy, and it's like hosted by Hart Shouldice. And I was like, motherfucker. I was like, he was a lawyer this whole time, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll be a busser at a restaurant,
Well,
maybe."
but I did like, I mean, you made the offer. You were like, hey, if you ever want a job, let me know. I was like, oh, that's
It's
super
very
kind, man. I
kind of you.
appreciate it. And
Yeah.
just left it there, right? I didn't want to be like, oh, as a matter of fact, like, I
Yeah,
don't need
yeah,
your
yeah.
busboy job.
No, no, it's just such a funny thing, like realizing that, like seeing the show and then just like
I'm
laughing at
sure.
myself, like what a dumbass. That's so funny.
Man, you know what? There are days when working at a restaurant is much more appealing. So
Yeah,
I hope the offer
yeah, yeah,
stands.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course, anytime. I don't even work there anymore, but yeah, I'm sure I can get you a job there still.
Appreciate that.
But I think there's something funny to that also of like I just viewed you as a comic. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like there's this like weird like community to allude to the word that you had chosen today to this like comedy that we do where it's like we've all there's this almost like underlying mutual respect of like you also get up there and try to make people laugh like there's in your own way and there's so much I think underlying respect to that and we don't even see like other things that you might be it's solely like I view you as a comic. I don't think about like what your day job might be.
Sure. And I mean, like anytime I hear someone say, especially like a peer, when I hear someone say, "Oh, I think of you as a comic," like that to me is a compliment. So I mean, thank you. I mean, obviously, you were saying nothing about whether you see me as a good comic, but you said you see me as a comic, so I
You're a great comic.
appreciate that. But it's no, man, it's definitely equalizing. Like when we, go into a club or whatever venue and do a show, or if we're talking online or whatever. Like I think we're all, for better or for worse, we're all comics first, and
Mhm.
it's very equalizing. And you know, there might be a little bit of interest in like, oh, like what do you do for a day job, or like, oh, like do you have kids at home or whatever. I mean, there's a little bit of an interest there, but like first and foremost, it's the comedy. Like, do you work at the comedy? Do you get laughs? Are you a good comic? That's what matters. And it's a weird sort of parallel kind of universe where I think in a lot of ways outside hierarchies don't exist within the realm of comedy. Like within the realm of comedy among comics, what matters is, do you take your comedy seriously? Are you working at it? Are like I said, are you getting laughs? Whatever. That's way more important than what your day job is or where you come from or whatever. So it's yeah, like I said, I think it's fairly equalizing in a lot of ways.
It's nice. It's like a refreshing thing to be part of. Like I find like
Sure.
obviously there's ups and downs to different communities, if you will, to keep trying to use the word, but
Right.
um
Take a drink every time you say it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I want to ask you so I had another guest on 2 episodes ago, Rob McDonald, and he is big in like motorsports, and he runs his own sort of like training and hiring company, and he works with like Audi and BMW and all these things. And he chose community, but then he underlined unity. That was like the way that he
Okay.
had viewed that word. And so I never tell someone like, oh, sorry, I can't use that word because we've already used it, even if it was like the episode before this, right? Because I
Okay.
think everyone has their own kind of thoughts on words, and that's what's interesting to me is people will have. I think I've done what's a good example, like resiliency or resilient, probably like 6 or 7 times, and every
Okay.
single time people have different ways of viewing it. So for you, what's the way that you view community? Like, why, when I asked you that question, was that the first thing that like came to your mind?
Well, I mean, community's always been important to me. Like when I sort of growing up, like I remember always having like, a village around us. And I grew up in the suburbs, like a place that on paper would look very generic and bland and uninspiring. But we really had a little village around us. And that was something that I really valued growing up was, going to the grocery store and knowing people and, knowing the receptionist at my doctor's office forever. And, having having very much a community around us. And I try to find that in whatever I do. And certainly in comedy, it's something I try to do. I try to foster community, be supportive of other comics. Even like, at times I get jealous, I get competitive, I get annoyed, just like any
All the
comic
time.
would. But I try to find that community. And that's, like we said a minute ago, comedy for the comics can be very equalizing. And it also, there's a real community there. And it's not always positive. It's not always warm. Like, we see people fighting, we see bitterness, whatever. I mean, that really happens in any community. But to me, community is, any sort of group of people with a shared experience, whether they want it or not, whether or not they seek it out. And it can exist in on any scale, in any plane. I even like when I do a show, I try to look at my shows as little communities, and like we're sort of in this together for the next hour and a half or whatever. And I host quite a bit, and when I host shows, what I try to set up at the beginning is like, hey, like I'm on stage, you're in the crowd, but like we're doing this thing together, like we're experiencing this together. We're going to be all in this like in sort of intense space for the next hour and a half. So let's buckle up and go on this ride. Being very aware that that group of people will never be in that room again. And so trying to sort of feed off of that and feed off the sort of spontaneity of it. But that to me,
Yeah.
that's community as well, even though it's just 90 minutes in a room that won't ever happen again. There's some community there, and there's a commonality of purpose, I suppose, in being there because everyone's there for a good time. And so I think as the
Hmm.
host or as a performer or whatever, it's your job to try to tease that out and find that good time for everybody. So comedy, I think there's like certainly a comedy community of comics, and that's important, that's valuable. But every show is, I think, a chance to build community and to feed off of that.
Yeah, and it's like especially an experience like that, especially if it's a good show, the that memory of like who they were sitting next to when they laugh really hard at something just starts to stick way more. And it is that we're all experiencing this together, love it or hate it. Sometimes even like I've been at movies that just turned out to be terrible, and when the audience starts turning on it, you, it's called mob mentality, but like that is
Sure.
also a community of in and of itself. And
Right.
like if you've ever been in that situation where you're around people and like you agree with them, you know what I mean? Like you're feeling something internally like I don't know if I like this. And then something else happens, you go, it kind of sucks. And then five other people around you go, this sucks. And they echo
Sure.
what you're feeling. You just start to build upon that. And there's something really interesting to me about that energy, be it negative or positive.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Look, I mean, some of the most effective comics are people who don't want the crowd to like them and who very much move
right.
in the opposite direction, right? Like just, I mean, on the local, Ottawa, Montreal basis, like George is silly, right? Is one of the most,
That's
the comic
crazy
who does,
energy when he's on stage. Yeah.
yeah, he consistently does better than most of us, but he's like very aggressive and in your face with the crowd. Caesar McCool is another one, right?
Yeah.
I love Caesar, like big teddy bear of a guy, but he's like can be pretty aggressive up there, and the community in his show is of people who are often taken aback and thrown off balance and whatever. It's not necessarily getting a big warm hug from the stage.
Yeah, because it's like it's the unexpected, right? So it kind of puts you back on your heels. Like you're
Yep,
not really anticipating something like that coming at you. You know, maybe somebody's gonna make fun of what you're wearing or whatever, but for someone to come at you the way that they come at audiences at times, and it's usually, you know, when you kind of strip it back just from a performance aspect, you're like, it is clever. Like,
for
you know,
sure.
in the moment, you might be like, your initial reaction is like, whoa, that's like so crazy of them to say, or that's crude or whatever. But then you're like, but it's working. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, if the crowd is
absolutely. No, it
laughing.
is it is clever, and you
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
do that well, right? I mean, I know we've both seen a lot of people try to do that sort of thing,
Yeah.
and it they don't do it well, and it blows up. I mean, and I've seen so many people, who will see like a Bill Burr or a Jim Jeffries, sort of white males who can say somewhat shocking things, but do it in a way where they don't lose the crowd, and that
Yeah.
it can work. And I've seen so many people be like, oh, I'm gonna, try to say this problematic word or address this problematic topic, not realizing how much skill it takes to do something like that
Takes
well. So yeah, I
years
mean,
of experience.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, guys like George and Caesar, like they're not just up there yelling and screaming. I mean, maybe sometimes, but for the most part, they're not just up there yelling and screaming. Like there's a method to it, and
Yeah, yeah. It
they
seems like they're
they know what
winging
they're doing.
it, but they're not. Like
Right,
that's the beauty of it, right? Is that like
for sure, man.
it does
But
look like it's coming straight off the top of their head, but everything is, I know, I believe everything's calculated with them.
but that's also, I mean, just stand up in general, right? I mean, good stand up always looks
Yeah.
spontaneous. It
Yeah.
always looks sort of casual. It's what I say is like good stand up is like a magic trick, right? Where, the crowd doesn't really see it coming, and like out comes this punchline or
Hmm.
out comes this idea that sort of comes out of nowhere. And it's funny. I talk to friends who go see stand up and people who don't, maybe don't approach it as, academically as you or I do. And they'll talk about someone they saw twice. And like, yeah, the first time he was super good. Like, I loved it. Second time, like, oh, he said some of the same jokes and it really wasn't as good. And it's like, yeah, that's because like
That's
you've
how the
already seen
sausage
that
is
rabbit
made.
pulled out of the hat
Yeah,
once.
yeah, yeah.
Like it can definitely lose something the second time around. But
Yeah. I
yeah, I
find that
mean,
even personally doing a bit like you do a bit for the first time, and if it does well, there's like such that there's that great feeling where you're like, man, my instincts are good. Like
sure,
I
yeah,
had that thought, I wrote it down, I performed it for the first time and it did well. Like it didn't bomb, you know, it did, like it got a good reaction. And then you do it a second time and it just doesn't have that
sure,
same like muster to it.
yep,
You know, it's such an interesting thing. Like, not to get too technical about comedy because there's other shit that I want to talk to you about, but yeah, it's just
sure,
front of my mind.
yeah. And part of it too as a comic is like you have to be in the moment and derive some form of pleasure from what you're doing. Because if you're just on autopilot and if you're just phoning it in, like yeah, a crowd will be able to,
Sucks.
yeah, yeah, and a crowd can tell that a mile away, right? I mean, obviously you have to be, you're gonna have jokes that you know well and jokes you can do in your sleep or whatever. And I've had it on where I'm on stage and I'm like, the words are coming out doing a bit, but in my head I'm like, okay, for my next joke, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? Like, am I zigging or
Mm,
zagging? But you
yeah,
also
yeah.
have to make sure that you're present and not phoning it in because the moment you're not leaning into it, the crowd will pick up on that and like the energy dies and then you're done. So you have to try
Yeah.
to keep it fun for yourself and keep yourself on your toes as well.
Have you found like being a lawyer and doing stand up at night? Have you found, first of all, I want to know like how long you've done each. But have you found any crossover between the two where like the stand up has helped you with one, or you know, being like a lawyer maybe made you more professional and presentable in terms of like comedy, like some way where the day job and the evening activity have sort of
Totally,
found a way
man.
to
Oh, there's
mix?
there's there's huge overlap for sure. So I mean, I've been a lawyer for I don't know, like 13 years, 12, 13 years. And I started doing stand up. I did it for the first time about 5 years ago, but it's really only been about 3 years that I've been doing it like pretty actively in earnest, like, trying to get up, at least once or twice a week. And yeah, look, like, I'm not, I'm not at liberty to talk too much about my work, but like, I'm in court, so I'm, doing that sort of thing, like on my feet in court regularly. And yeah, there's a huge overlap because when you're in court, you have to be persuasive, you have to be confident, you have to be unfazed, you have to hold the room's attention.
Hmm.
So it all very much translates to stand up. It's a very, very similar skill set. Even though I don't, when I do stand up, I never even really mention that I'm a lawyer. I don't at
Right.
all.
Kind of
Um,
keep that.
I just want to keep it separate. And I feel like if I talked about being a lawyer on stage, that would have to be my thing.
Yeah, you don't want it to
And
be
that would I
the,
would have to
yeah, yeah.
address that and do a bunch with it. And so I just, I'd rather
And
sort of,
then you've got that side of your life being like, are you going out talking about cases?
yeah, exactly.
You're like,
So yeah, it's
maybe.
just cleaner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I keep it separate. But yeah, I mean, you asked like, do I sort of treat comedy professionally? Like, yeah, for sure. Like I treat it like a job. I take it
Hmm.
seriously. Like it's just, yeah, I don't I don't drink when I'm doing shows. Like I'll have a beer, but like I don't, it's not a party for me. I try to,
Right.
show up early, whatever. I try to treat it like it's a job. And that has paid off. That has gotten me gigs. That has gotten
Yeah.
me like booked again and again and again because different people come at it for different reasons. And there are a ton of people in the Ottawa scene and elsewhere who, the comedy scene is their main social life, and they go to mics and they party, and a lot of times, like it's funny, I've noticed a lot of times, like I'll go to a show and I always try to stay till the end of the show. Like I don't leave early unless I really have to,
Yeah.
but I'll go to a show, do my set, stay till the end, and then hang out for 5, 10 minutes or whatever, and then leave. And for a lot of other comics, like that's just their night is just starting. Like when the show ends, that's like when the hang starts. That's when the social side, and that's great. And God bless them. That's just not where I'm at. So for me, it's more, yeah, it's more like a job. It's a job that I enjoy and I choose to do. And I'm
Hmm.
certainly like friendly with the other comics, and there are a ton of comics that I count as friends, some as very good friends, but it's not a social thing first and foremost for me. And it's
Right.
totally cool to do this for other people. Like I'm not saying I'm doing it right. I'm not saying I'm like better because I take it more seriously or don't party or whatever. That's just it's just a
Yeah.
function of where I'm at.
Yeah. It's just part of the community.
Yeah, there it is. Ding, ding,
There's
ding.
different, everybody drink again.
Yeah,
There's just different parts of the community, right? Like, and some people lean more heavily on it than others. And, um, like it's interesting. I want to say, I don't know when, like maybe in my teens, all the way through my 20s, I was like, I don't know, not anti-religion, but like, just kind of going like, there's a lot, like finding everything wrong with it, I think.
hmm.
And maybe rightfully so. They've done a lot of fucked up shit over the years, for sure.
Right.
It's not like there were
Nope.
unfounded reasons why
Not
I was
always great.
hating on religion, right?
Yeah.
And all of them equally. Um, but then as I get older, I kind of go, you know what? Like maybe there is, not for me, but like for some people, there is like a sense of community in those. You're
Oh,
meeting
for sure.
once a week. Like I look at like going to comedy shows is like I'm seeing these people each time. I see some of the same people every single time. We all have this singular topic that we all sort of bond over. Um, and just like a comedy community, there's going to be like some bad moments throughout it, some bad choices made by some of the members. Same thing goes with like a religious community. But yeah, it's interesting. The older you get, the more you kind of reflect on your views and opinions of things and go, now I sort of see the utilitarian use to that like thing in society,
Absolutely, man. Like I grew up like my family went to church when I grew up, but like we weren't like fire and brimstone religious
Right.
kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
It really was
Christmas
largely
and
a
Easter.
it was largely a community thing. Absolutely. And like that's where yeah, like I sort of yeah, we had sort of other families that we sort of hung out with, and it was something you could kind of count on, like week to week, going and sort of seeing these people. Then you'd see them out like in the wider community. Um, yeah, and it wasn't it. Yeah, like I say, it wasn't like we weren't like a super hardcore religious family. That was just what we did on Sunday mornings, and it was
Hmm.
never like if my sister or I didn't want to go, we just wouldn't go. Like it was never like we
Yeah.
had to go or we got
You're going
dragged
to
to.
hell.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. But there was like there was a value in that for sure in terms of like community building and like finding finding your niche kind of thing. I mean, that wasn't certainly our, like my family like didn't like revolve around that. It was like one part
Yeah.
of like other things we did out in the community, other things we were involved with. But it was yeah, I think the problem is when it becomes, religion becomes informed people's entire worldview, their entire
Hmm.
social view, their entire
Right.
political view. Like that's when it,
That's with
gets to be a
everything.
problem.
I hate
Yeah.
that with anything. I hate when
Sure.
somebody, I get it if you're a performer, like we were talking about, like if you started doing just lawyer jokes and that would become your whole personality. But like, I smoke weed, but like I people who it's their entire personality, like it's all they ever talk about, it's like it's annoying,
Yeah.
and that's like anything. Like if even if somebody was like, I'm a runner, I love my running community, and they're just like constantly talking about running, you're like, "You shut the fuck up." Say
Yeah.
anything else, say anything else. Like, why does this have to be your whole personality?
Yeah.
But I
And
digress.
I mean, you also wonder like if how like sustainable something like that is on a healthy level. If you're like so
Yeah.
deep in something and so defined by it. Also, then what happens if it gets taken away from you, or do you have then a hole in you and kind of losing your sense of self, right? Like if you only define
Nah.
yourself as being a runner, if then you get injured, then are you looking around being like, oh, like what else am I if I'm not
You're a
that?
sitter
It's
now.
tricky. Yeah. Yeah.
Sit the hell down. You can play pickleball. Just little movements back and forth. What got you into comedy? Like, because I know, like, for myself, it was I found a huge, I don't know, mental block to get over that hump to try it,
Yeah.
to go from like liking comedy, being a fan of comedy, to then thinking maybe I should try to do comedy, and then writing something down and then forcing myself to go to that first mic to get that first one out of the way. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I was always a big fan of comedy. Big like the movies I gravitated towards were comedy, TV shows, comedy, and stand-up as well. But I mean, when I was like a teenager in the 90s in Canada, we didn't really have access to much in the way of stand-up. Like this was obviously pre-internet. We didn't have, I mean, early internet, but like pre-YouTube, pre-streaming, obviously. We didn't have HBO or anything. So whatever stand-up we had access to was whatever sort of trickled down onto CBC or the Comedy Network. So it was enough for me to be drawn to it and interested in it and really wanting to do it. But I had no concept of how that happened. And I remember saying to my dad once when I was in high school, like, oh, I think I want to try to do stand-up comedy. Like, I think I'd like to go to, there's this place like Yuck Yucks. I think I want to try that. And I remember my dad saying to me, like, Hart, that's cool if you want to do that. Go once and watch first. Because I think like you might be kind of shocked by, what goes on down there, like what people talk about.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
all I knew of stand up was like heavily sanitized what was on, like I say, CBC or the Comedy
Right.
Network.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I sort of took a step back and I kept like in the back of my head, I knew I wanted to try it, but I never really found my like an entry point. Like there was nothing to really sort of push me over the ledge.
Hmm.
And then in 2019, some lawyer friends of mine were doing a fundraiser, getting lawyers to tell jokes, and they asked me if I wanted to do it. I was like, yeah, perfect. Like that's sort of sounds like my, this will be my chance to give it a try. Not
Yeah.
knowing that it'd be something I would pursue. I was like, oh, like I will, check this off and away we go. So I did it. It was at the old Yuck Yucks on Elgin Street.
Nice. I miss that
And I
place.
like I took it. Yeah, that was a great club.
Great.
God bless it. Uh, and so I took it seriously. Like I wrote a set with transitions. I knew I was going to know pretty much everybody there. So I did like some inside jokes, but I also wanted to do a couple jokes that were like, jokes that could work anywhere. And it
Right.
turns out they were terrible, but like I didn't want to do only inside jokes.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but like other people went up there, like they were reading off their phones or they were just kind of riffing, but I like had a set. I had, practiced it. I nailed it down. And so I got up there, and because I knew almost everyone in the room, I made a couple inside jokes. It went really, really well. Like I got
That's
like
amazing.
some of the biggest laughs, like even to this point, some of the biggest laughs ever. Like my first joke I told got an applause break. So I was like
Hell yeah.
off and running. It was great. But so I came away from the show being like, oh, like I'm a prodigy. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I
yeah. You're like
like
fucking so good
legend
at this.
status. Like let's
The
call Netflix
delusions of an early
right now.
stand-up
Oh, for
comedian
sure.
are the best. It's such a
I had no
fun,
idea.
fun time.
I had
You're
no
like,
idea how
I'm
hard it
gonna
actually
audition for
is.
SNL.
Yeah, exactly. Like had no idea how hard it actually was. So I did this.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, oh, I am the man. And so I did another show like I don't know a few weeks later at Absolute on a Monday night on the Monday night their open mic, and I got nothing. I got like one moderately polite chuckle, like
Uh,
one barely reaction was all I got in 6 minutes. I just ate it the whole time. And Tavis Maplesden was hosting. So Tavis is like an Ottawa guy, a great host, super funny guy.
yeah,
Can be a
he's
bit
been
of a
on the
roaster.
show.
Like, what's that?
He's been on the show, so people can
That's
go
right.
check
Yeah,
out
yeah, so,
Tavis's
yeah.
episode.
So Tavis was hosting, and I was really worried that after my set, like when I just crashed so hard, that Tavis was going to just lean into me. But he, like, I told this to him before, like, he did not say anything. Like, came back up. He was like, "All right, Hart Shouldice, give it up for Hart. Our next
Yeah.
act." My
He
God.
just kept it going.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then I was like, okay, after that, I said, oh, this is actually really hard. Like, when you don't have, I mean, it's such a head start when you know people in the crowd, you can like make
Hmm.
insight. Like, it's not even, I mean, it's stand up, but it's,
Yeah.
I mean, so much of the work is getting the audience to relate to you, getting the audience to know who you are, whatever. When you get on stage and like all that work is already done. So, I mean, the way I look at it is I really, since then, I've just been trying to like bridge the gap between those first two sets. Like my first one, which like went so well, and my second one where I got nothing. And so trying to like, work my way between those two since then. And yeah, I mean, I've kept at it, and it's, I mean, even now, like, a good set feels great. Like obviously I enjoy doing well. That's why we do this, but it's the bad sets are often what motivate me more. And I
Where
find
you learn the
myself like,
most.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like where I get really hungry with the bad sets and like, breaking it down afterwards. What could I have done differently? How could I have reacted to this better or whatever? Like it's the bad sets that I reflect on more than the good ones. And the bad ones are almost what keep me coming back.
Yeah, like when I have a bad set, I just look at like one time I was like, why did that just feel off? Like it just didn't work the same way. And I did everything the exact same, like line for line. It's word for word the jokes I do. And then I rewatched it and I was like, you could almost feel, and I've spoken about this before at nauseum on this podcast, but like there's beats to comedy, and
Sure.
if you're offbeat, it can just miss. It can just not,
Totally, man.
or you steamroll the one laugh that you get and you just keep talking. You don't give them a chance to react and to laugh, and you just try to hit them again with something, and it could throw off the timing of everything. And it's one of those things that you don't really pick up on until you've done it enough times where you start being like, oh, okay, there's real like not just timing, but like beats to like how the
There's a
setup
rhythm
is.
to it
Too many words, can cause it to go and
for
miss
sure.
that. Yeah. It's
and
so
and
weird.
sometimes you can't even know what'll work and what won't until you try it a few times. And yeah, the difference in like one word or one syllable can make or break a joke, which is can be very frustrating. But it's one of the special things about stand up is there's no sort of special formula, and you do have to let the jokes breathe, like give things a beat. Like
Hmm.
when I the first few times I did it, what I really was doing was like it was more like an essayist or a humorist where I would like write out, like a cute or funny essay or whatever, and then basically just memorize it and go up and recite
Mm.
it, which is not stand up. Like, crowds don't want someone who's up there just like, spitting something out that they've memorized. And
Hmm.
it took me a while to realize that that's not, it's not necessarily going to get you laughs. And what works well as something written, like something written for someone to read, is not always going to play well on the stage. Sometimes it does, but it certainly won't always. And that took me a while to figure out that like, yeah, what's funny on the page isn't always funny from the stage. And I also like, my first
Bars.
few sets, like I would be not,
Should be on a t-shirt.
I'm sure it is. Uh, but my first like few sets, like I wasn't really in the moment. I wasn't like really reacting to things super well because I was just hyper focused on like,
Mm.
what I'd written down, what I had memorized, and like I was, focused on reciting it and just was, kind of rigid and not, yeah, not in the moment. And I know looking back, I know that crowds could certainly tell that for sure.
Yeah, it's yeah, and again, it's one of those weird things where I always tell comics to keep recording themselves because I'll see so many comics just
Yeah.
going up on stage. I'm like, what are you doing? At least get an audio or something. Because what, like, why get on stage if you're not gonna try to use this experience, good or bad, to like,
Sure.
even if it's just comics there, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you say something in the moment and then later you're going, what was that thing I said? You should have fucking recorded it.
Gary Gulman, who's like has such great advice for young comics.
Yeah, his
A few
series
years
during the
ago.
pandemic was
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Where
awesome.
he
Awesome.
tweeted out a piece of advice every
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Incredible. And one of his pieces of advice is not only record your sets, but he also, after he listens back and he writes out everything he said. So Gary Gulman, one of his pieces of advice was record your sets, listen to them, and then like write out what you say, which I have not done. Like I do record
It's
my sets, I do
brutal.
listen back, but that just sounds. Do you do that?
I do that. So I can add on to that. Todd Van Allen gave me an amazing piece of advice. When I was like trying to think how many, I don't know. I had been doing comedy for a little while, and I took when I lived in Toronto, I took a stand-up comedy 101 class at Second City because I was like, I think I know comedy, but like from what? From like what people on podcasts have said and maybe what I read in
Sure.
a book, like what would Second City teach me? And Todd Van Allen filled in one of the days for the class, and I think I've been doing comedy like 6 years at this time. And then he filled in and was like, what he does was he types out his jokes and does it like paragraph format. So like it's, even on both sides. But then every time that he hears like a big laugh, not just like a chuckle, like a big reaction, he'll hit the enter button so that it goes down to the next line as he's typing.
Ah,
So then you can see a literal physical graph of
interesting.
if there's a big block of text, then this is too many words. And unless
Okay.
unless it's a huge payoff and then a payoff and then a payoff and a payoff, like Mike Birbiglia sort of does that. There's a
Sure.
long build up, but then the payoff is huge, and then he usually
Yeah.
hits you with like a few more tags. So it's
Yeah.
kind of worth it. It depends on like your style of comedy, obviously. If you're like
Yeah.
a one line joke, then like you want to make sure that's really short, each
Sure.
each of the
Yeah.
lines.
I've heard Nate Bargatze say that like you should never be too far from a laugh.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the farther you are from a laugh, the bigger that laugh has to be.
Oh yeah.
So if you have a big space without a laugh, like you need something that's gonna hit hard. When did you start doing comedy? You just said like at some point you've been doing it for 6 years. How long have you been at it?
So I started in 2011.
Oh wow.
I was 19. I was at
Okay.
college and I started doing it. And then I did it for a year and then I moved back to Brockville. So it was like difficult, I found, to get to shows and stuff because there wasn't really anything there.
Sure.
And then started taking it like, so maybe like a year off right after doing it for a year. And then after that, I did it all the way to COVID in 2020 in Toronto. And
Okay.
then probably a year off from around COVID before I got back and do it again. And I've been doing it consistently then since like 2021. So
Right
it's
on.
like I just kind of count it all together because even when I wasn't on stage maybe for a year doing comedy, I was still writing jokes.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I was still consuming comedy and like learning about comedy and like thinking about it constantly, and then made the step of going back. So I just kind of count that time period together. And I even
Sure.
say that to people too who are like, oh, I just do it like every now and again. I'm like, still count yourself as a comic. Like,
Right.
because you don't know what your path in it's not linear, number one, and number two, like every single person that's successful in this industry has a totally different pathway to that success,
Sure.
you
And yeah,
know.
I mean, there are gatekeepers who will tell you like, yeah, like you have to do 6 sets a week or it doesn't count or whatever. And I mean, look, I mean, yeah, do whatever works for you and whatever
If you're
keeps
good,
you
you're good,
in.
man. Like
What's that?
I said, if you're good, you're good. Like
Sure.
I don't think I think if you need to get on stage 6 times a week, then it's probably because you want to make something really great. But I think if you also have the confidence that it's going to come out great the first, second, and third time that you do it, then why not go with that too, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you have to find what works for you and what motivates you. Also, like, with sets, I try to look at. quality over quantity, right? And so, I mean, I try not to waste a set. I mean, I can't do as many sets as I otherwise would because I've, other stuff going on in my life. I've got a wife and young kids and um, other things on the go. So I try to make my sets count and never just go through the motions
Yeah.
with a set. Because I try to, even like we were talking about earlier, even if it's like a tiny room, even if it's only comics in the crowd, and I don't always achieve this, but I try to, yeah, I try to have some sort of benefit, some sort of, I mean, growth is kind of a cheesy term, but some sort of
No.
growth from every set. Because I really, the times I dislike comedy the most, and I certainly don't always love it, but the times I dislike it the most is when I go do a set and afterwards feel like I didn't get anything out of it. Like I didn't get any
Mm,
better, I didn't improve, I didn't
yeah.
enjoy it. Like if I'm not taking anything away from it, and that's on me. Like it's on me to try to make every set work, try to get something out of every set. But yeah, the times when I am just going through the motions or when I don't feel like I've taken anything from it, those are the ones that really frustrate me.
For me, I have that exact same feeling. And the shows that I feel that on, where I'm like, I'm going through the motions. This is just frustrating me so much, is competition shows. I've
Okay.
realized that I'm like, I do not get in a good like mental headspace when it's a competition for this thing that I do for fun.
And is that is
You
that
know, like
because is that because with the competition, like you're just sort of working on tried and true jokes that there's not much challenge to it, or is
yeah,
it because
you're
you're
like,
placing pressure on
no,
yourself?
it's pressure, right? Like it's like I'm doing my tried and true jokes. And if I get eliminated, it's like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
I
sure.
I I do the tried and true my material to find, your own sort of fans, like people that like your unique way of doing comedy. So to have it held up against other people's unique way of doing comedy and then judged on a basis of this is better than this one, it's just like it just puts me in like a weird headspace where I'm like, I hate this. Like
Yeah, that's totally
yeah,
fair.
yeah, yeah. You just want
I
to
mean,
like,
comedy's just it's so subjective, right? And
yeah.
so, um, yeah, I mean, yeah,
I mean, a
it's
bomb's a
I
bomb,
look,
but like still.
right, yeah, exactly. And there are
Yeah,
some comics who are better at it than others,
yeah,
absolutely. Like
yeah,
you sort of, but when you're sort of trying to like rank people over the course of a night, and to compare like an Emmett Morrison, who's like a one-liner, very dry one-liner comic, with I'll say his name again, with George Seeley, who's like very abrasive and in your face and
yeah.
doesn't really tell jokes. Like, how do you measure
It's like, which
those
one
two
do you
against each other?
like more? That's kind
Yeah,
of what
yeah,
it is, and it's totally personal preference.
yeah, yeah. It is, and I like, yeah. I mean, with the competitions, like I've not like never won one. Like I've won little like one night things, but I've never won the like sort of weeks long kind of thing. But I always just say, look, like if I, tell the jokes I wanted to tell the way I wanted to tell them, then like that's really all I can do.
Yeah.
And I try not to put too much stock in it. And that's gotten easier. Like, my first, couple years, I placed a lot of stock in the competition and thought like, oh, everything's riding on this, whatever. But now I realize that it doesn't. I mean, if you win like the big summer competition, either Yuck Yucks or Absolute, if you win one of those, for sure that can open doors for you. And if you make
Sure.
it to the finals as someone who was otherwise not really known in the community, for sure that can do things for you. But other than that, like as long as you're consistently showing up, consistently doing shows, trying to get better, trying different things, like the competitions are not make or break.
I
They're
get why they're needed. Like I see it now from more of like a business point of view. It's like comedy is fucking slow in the summer, Like that's just
Mhm.
it's just how it is. People would rather be outside on a patio drinking beers. Like,
Yeah,
so to convince them to come into this like dark air conditioned room in the middle of the summer and watch people tell jokes, it's like that's tough. So competition is a perfect way to you tell five people to tell five people
exactly. That's exactly
to
right.
come and vote for me, and it's
Yeah.
you fill out a room which would otherwise be dead. So genius from like a business standpoint of view. And I honestly think too that more comics need to also think about like from the business owner's perspective. Like I see a lot of people online that get mad at a TikToker that has a big following who's like filling out a comedy club, and it's like, well, they're not a real comedian. And it's like, yeah, the club owner doesn't give a shit about
Sure.
how
Yeah.
good you are. Like some of them do. Some of them are real fans of comedy and actually want to see like talented comedians for sure. A lot of them just want to sell drinks and food and fill out a room night after night. And
Sure.
if this guy from TikTok can do that, give him 40 minutes. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it doesn't even
Yeah.
have
No,
to be good.
absolutely.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you like the sort of, and look, like I'm not a full-time professional comedian. Like I can't, speak with any like, I'm certainly not an insider, but I mean the days of, getting big because you're a really good comic and you like build a following that way, like from people coming out to see you and whatever, that's like those days are done. Like if you want to build a big following and be a successful professional, um, by and large, the way to do it is to like build a big online following because,
Hmm.
club owners will look at your Instagram and want to know how many followers you have, how many people you can bring in. Like that is secondary to your raw ability. And I've heard so many, established professional successful comics like say this very thing. Like you're
Yeah.
not going to build a career just by being funny. Like that's
Yeah. I mean, that's why they call it
not the way it works
show
anymore.
business, right? Like
Yeah.
that's, you got to have both. You can't
Yeah.
just rely on being funny. You also have to figure out that kind of
Also,
side of it too.
and look, like there's a bitterness in like comedy purists are like, oh, those people aren't like not real comics, whatever. And I get why people say that, but at the same time,
And
like,
then teach them, you know what I mean? Like teach them how to be a real comic then. If you
sure,
believe that you feel that way about it, then why not reach out and try to help? You know?
sure,
Maybe they'll
sure,
let you open and then you'll gain 10,000 fans. Like
right.
it
But
does.
also like it's if they're getting people out the door, I mean, it's going back to what we
Yeah.
talked about, like the community of an event. Like, there's so many reasons to stay at home
Hmm.
now, and so many
For
things you can
sure.
watch at home and whatever. Like, there's you know no reason to leave the house ever.
You're
So
competing against Netflix and HBO. It's like,
for sure. So
yeah.
anyone who can get 200 people into a room all at the same time and to get them to pay money for it is that's an accomplishment in and of itself. And that does take talent and skill, even if it's not the talent and skill of writing jokes and delivering them and whatever. There is some talent there, and that is impressive. And I mean, to build on that, like talking about what it takes to get people out the door, it almost every time I do a show, I feel so grateful that there's anybody there, right?
Yeah.
That like,
I did
let
Yuck
alone
Yuck
like,
or I did
what's
Absolute
that?
and I did Absolute on whatever it was, Wednesday, and they were like, oh, there's like 100 people. I'm like, 100 people on a Wednesday? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like I was like,
And
that's
who
gonna
and
be a
who haven't
great
who
show.
haven't heard of who haven't heard of anybody who's on the show,
No.
right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're not there because there's a big draw. They're there because they
Want to see
want
comedy.
to have a night of comedy
Yeah,
and
yeah.
want to see what's
Fucking
going on.
awesome.
And I think that's great. And that's why like when especially when I'm hosting, I try to be appreciative of the crowd and also say, yeah, like we're doing this thing together. Like we're all sort of having this like shared, very visceral experience, which I think is to be celebrated, regardless of what actually gets people there.
Yeah, totally. Now, Hart, there's a question that I always sort of end the podcast with that I always ask my guests. If you, I want you to think of yourself at 15 years old. The question is basically, what advice would you give to your younger self? But I like to, make you visualize yourself at 15 because I think that's the most powerful advice is knowing who you were and what you were going through at that time and have other people relate to that versus you try and say something that might be relatable to people. I want it to be relatable to you. So think of yourself at 15 and the phone rings and it's you now on the other end. Like, what do you say to your 15-year-old self?
Hmm. Well, um, I would say to my 15-year-old self, be more open-minded to other opinions, other perspectives, other experiences, other kinds of art, other music, whatever. Like, sort of take in more than you are. Because it took me a while to relax a little bit and open up a little bit more to other experiences. And I would say try to stick to things a little bit more. Like I was, in high school and even beyond, I was a little bit of a generalist and didn't pursue. Uh, I was sort of undisciplined with my interests and academically as well. And so I would encourage myself to stick with things, a little bit more than I did, and would get bored of things pretty quickly. Um, what 15 like so I would have been whatever, like grade 10, I guess. Grade 9, grade 10. Um, at the end of high school, I lost my dad, and he and I were
Mm.
quite close. So on a hyper specific basis, certainly not general advice, but like on a hyper
Yeah.
specific basis, like maybe a reminder to, enjoy the times with the old man and sort of soak those in as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which is, would have been nice to know at the time. But I think just being more appreciative and more respectful of other people's opinions, the value in other people's experiences would have
Mhm.
served me well at that point.
Powerful advice, man. I appreciate you being open and giving that. I want people to go follow you on Instagram. It's at Heart of my phone
Heart on the phone. That's me.
and at Heart of a Phone on X as well. Is there anywhere else that you want people to check you out?
No, not really. I don't
Yeah.
really use X that much anymore. So yeah, check me
Okay.
out on Instagram for sure. And yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. This is fun. I could have had this conversation for hours. I could talk
Oh yeah.
comedy all
Oh
all, all
yeah.
day and all night.
Same. We'll do it
Yeah,
again
man.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. All right,
Wicked.
that's been the episode, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. As always, I've been Johnny Rogers, and until next time, keep it classy. You've been listening to the Johnny Rogers Show. New episodes air every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.